I didn't think I'd be reviewing another comedy special, but when I saw people comparing No Pain to You'd Be Surprised, I thought this had to be an exaggeration. I had to see for myself if the comparison was accurate, and after sitting through this catastrophe, it turned out to be pretty close to the truth. In some ways, I'd say this special may even be worse than Schaub's, if you can believe that. Going into this special, I didn't really have any expectations. I didn't feel strongly about D'Elia one way or another, partly because I'm not too familiar with him. I've listened to him a few times with other comedians like Brian Callen and Will Sasso, and I thought he was funny. On the other hand, I tried listening to his podcast a few times and couldn't make it too far. I'm not really interested in mediocre riffs from a 40-year-old who looks 50 and acts 20. But in general, I didn't have any strong opinion of D'Elia before I started watching No Pain. This changed very quickly. The elephant in the room with this special is the bizarre voice D'Elia does for the majority of the set.
Man, I had so many toys. Like my parents, they'd stop at the doorway. They'd be like, "Remember, we love you." Like, dude.
I have to talk about this first because if I don't mention it now, you're going to wonder what in the world is going on for the rest of the video. I've tried to figure out exactly what D'Elia is doing here, but it's hard to put my finger on it. There is an Eastern European thing going on, reminiscent of Two Wild and Crazy Guys.
We cruise for them on our tight slacks, which give us great bulges.
Wait a minute, here's like my dad, but here's not my dad.
But there is also a fair amount of this Bobcat Goldthwait thing and a little bit of Mitch Hedberg in the mix too. The really weird part is that the accent comes and goes throughout the special. Sometimes he sounds close to his normal voice, and other times it's like listening to a Romanian immigrant who learned to speak English from watching Pauly Shore and Biodome.
Who keeps making all these guys? Who keeps making all these jeans?
Maybe he was nervous because it does kind of fade out over the course of the special. Or maybe it was some kind of defense mechanism. I've seen some of his fans say that the special is bad because he's doing a character and this isn't the real Chris D'Elia. So it's possible that this was a subconscious or even conscious attempt to deflect criticism. However, it could just be that he thinks that using a funny voice makes the things he's saying funnier, which is the biggest problem with the special in my opinion. There's no substance. It's just funny noises and physical comedy to stretch out what is basically nothing. I'm not saying that D'Elia should be trying to send a message or anything, but there's simply no material here. When I criticized Schaub, I said he probably could have whittled his special down to an okay 20 to 30 minutes. His problem was that he padded the length of the set out by tagging each joke with his B, C, and D punchlines, which made it an exhausting thing to watch. Where Schaub filled his set out with lots of substandard punchlines, D'Elia literally stretches the length of his bits out by repeating himself, laughing at himself, and taking long, unnecessary pauses. There are really only 3 bits in this entire special, but even calling them bits may actually be giving D'Elia too much credit. They're more like epic random thoughts that D'Elia says in a voice that is supposed to make you think they're jokes.
Dolphins fuck people. Hey, are you listening to me?
D'Elia has an idea for a thing that he thinks is funny, like dolphins having sex with people. But instead of developing the idea beyond, "Isn't this thing I mentioned funny?" he repeats the setup 5 times in a row, while laughing and striking hilarious poses. He isn't just committing the cardinal sin of laughing at his own jokes either. D'Elia brings his jokes to a screeching halt to laugh at his own setups like somebody in the middle of a mental breakdown. This makes a 50-minute special feel like it's 2.5 hours long. When I got around to D'Elia's big dolphin bit, I thought it must be the closing bit because I felt like I had been watching the special for an hour. In reality, I was only 30 minutes in, and he drags that dolphin bit out for ages with multiple tangents that don't add anything. Even when he manages to guffaw his way to the end of a joke, he can't just let it be. He has to contort his face and flail his limbs around like he's auditioning for a reboot of The Mask. Brendan Schaub was bad, but this is leather special level physical comedy. And if you're watching his mannerisms and taking note of the bionic jaw and absolutely genuine laugh, don't jump to conclusions. D'Elia has never touched a drug or drink in his entire life. Nothing on this special is of any consequence, but the straight edge material is probably the flattest portion of the set. There's nothing wrong with being straight edge, but if you make it the cornerstone of your personality, you might as well bring up your astrological sign too. You're basically saying that there isn't anything interesting or compelling about you as an individual. The reason it seems to me that D'Elia brings up his sobriety is to pose the question, guys, isn't it weird that I'm a comedian even though I had a good upbringing and I don't abuse substances? Considering you tell the same kind of jokes as a 21-year-old white girl in her first year of comedy, no, not really, Chris. Like, oh my god, it's so weird. One time I growled at a baby in the mall, you guys. You might as well end your bits with #adulting. Even though I'm being sarcastic here, this is one of the general themes of the special. On more than one occasion, D'Elia has to point out that he is, in fact, a 39-year-old man.
I'm 39!
Like we won't be able to deduce that from his hip clothing and off-the-rails persona. This guy is so wacky. He does wild things like sending strangers pictures of Asian families. There's no way he's older than 25. He's a regular Rob Dyrdek. Even if it was true that Chris does stuff like send pictures of Asian families to random people, which I don't think he does, that's less the behavior of a lol-so-random comedian and more like something mentioned by the friends and family members of a serial killer after he's caught. Which he even alludes to when he mentions that he also likes to take pictures of strangers on airplanes and then airdrop them to everybody else in the plane.
Dude, that's like the worst horror movie ever!
This is another problem with his special. D'Elia can't decide whether he wants to be seen as an immature goofball who does silly voices, or the edgy cool guy who wears ripped t-shirts and insults people in public. I don't know how this guy is having a 19-year-old's identity crisis in his 40s, but it would definitely explain his choice of tattoos. While this is all fairly bad, the worst part of the special is when D'Elia briefly attempts social commentary. I don't know why he felt the need to include a bit about censorship, because A, he doesn't add anything interesting or relevant to the conversation, and B, he's not an edgy comedian. I know I'm not the first person to point that out, but it's worth mentioning. The most offensive bit he does on this entire special is a half-baked sort of rip-off of Louis C.K.'s "of course, but maybe" bit, where he vaguely implies that black people are slower at crosswalks. The crux of his anemic censorship bit seems to be that if you censor what comedians can say, pretty soon they'll just be making noises on stage, which either proves that D'Elia has no self-awareness, or that No Pain is the most subversive stand-up special of all time. I'm going to go with the former. Now, seeing how vapid and unfunny this special is, you might find it hard to believe that any of the material was stolen. But at least two of D'Elia's bits bear an unmistakable resemblance to the work of other comedians. The first is an almost verbatim ripoff of a joke told by Aaron Berg.
I like to work out, as you can probably tell. I just like to do my upper body, though.
Honestly, my legs are thin. I'm not proportionate. Like, I get my upper body is bigger.
So now my upper body's all puffy, my legs are tiny. You put me in a pair of tight blue jeans, I just look like a confused genie.
I feel like I look like a fucking genie coming out of a bottle.
Whenever you bring up accusations of joke theft, there will always be people who suggest it must be parallel thinking, even when the jokes are virtually identical. What removes any doubt from my mind in regards to this joke is that it doesn't even make sense coming from D'Elia. It makes sense when Aaron Berg says it, because he's built like a brick shithouse. D'Elia isn't, he's just a slightly muscular, skinny guy. Still, you could make the claim that it's somewhat unlikely that D'Elia stole a 10-year-old joke from little-known comedian Aaron Berg. On the other hand, I don't think you can say the same thing about another one of D'Elia's jokes, which is almost exactly the same as a sketch from Key and Peele that has been seen by millions.
A lot of gangsters say, yo, I don't give a fuck. You'd go home if you shit your pants, cuz.
We gotta go back home, man.
Why?
I pooped my pants.
Open the window. Listen, no, something has stopped this from happening tonight.
I honestly think this is more egregious than Amy Schumer's joke stealing. At least with Schumer, you can theoretically make the case that the jokes she was accused of stealing were old and obscure enough in most cases that potentially nobody pointed the similarities out to her. With D'Elia, we're talking about him ripping off a sketch that has been viewed millions of times from the most famous sketch show since Chappelle's Show. I find it incredibly hard to believe that when D'Elia was working this material out, not a single person came up to him and said, hey, that gangster pooping his pants bit is like almost exactly the same as a Key and Peele sketch. Not one person noticed a similarity before he recorded the special? I don't buy it. There really isn't much else to say about this special. I could theoretically break down some of the jokes, but as I said, they really don't have much more going on besides a premise of an idea of something that he thinks is funny, which he doesn't really ever expand upon and just kind of fills with a lot of lazy tangents and bad physical comedy and laughing at himself. It's really not more than about a 15-minute long set that is just completely stretched to fill an entire Netflix special. There's no substance to D'Elia's material, and it's just painful to watch. But how bad is it honestly? Is it worse than you'd be surprised? That's the question I posed in the thumbnail and the title. And going into this, I didn't think that was possible, but it is. As bad as You'd Be Surprised was, it seemed like Schaub tried to compose actual jokes. They were bad jokes, but they had some kind of concept behind them. They were fleshed out to some degree, if not an unnecessary degree that actually made the special worse. The point is, he didn't just say an idea and then laugh at himself for 50 minutes. At the very least, You'd Be Surprised is unintentionally funny. No Pain is just a humor black hole. As always, I want to thank you guys for watching the video, as well as liking, commenting, and subscribing. I know some of you are getting a bit antsy about Down the Bottleneck Part 3, but don't worry, I am working on it. I just thought this would be a fun little video to throw out there while the other stuff is in progress. Anyway, if you want to support the channel, please check out the links in the description, and I'd also like to give a special thank you to my supporters on Patreon. Thank you, James Taylor, Bone CK, Micro Balls, Dan Thomas, Derpatronus, Traumahound, Tex Punchum, CP, Jake Tracy, Tamby Helmick, Bart Wackanar, The Son of Man, Neem, Origami Fleshlight, Kevin Howard, Medication Doesn't Work, and Jackie.